fans, and welcome back to the Brockopp side. Well, with the recent release of the live-action Lion King remake, I figured this was the perfect time to start up this new series where I take a remake of a film and compare it to its original. We're going to take a look at the story, the characters, the visuals, and then wrap things up with a verdict where we'll hopefully figure out which is truly the superior film. So just keep in mind this is going to be some of my own personal opinions, so there's a good chance you might disagree with me on some things, but that's okay. If you want to leave your own thoughts on these movies themselves, then leave a comment down below. But if you like this video, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button. But anywho, it's the Lion King versus the Lion King. So let's get into it. Story-wise, both films are practically the same. Both revolve around Scar killing Mufasa, then Simba running away for a few years, slumming it up with Timon and Pumbaa, only to come back as a young man to take over the throne and save the Pride Land. When I was sitting in the theater watching the remake, I had unfortunately not rewatched the original Lion King beforehand like I wanted to, so the original wasn't overly fresh in my mind, but just by sitting there and watching these scenes play out, I could definitely feel that everything just seemed incredibly familiar, like it was just kind of playing out almost exactly like the animated film did. The 1994 and the 2019 versions basically have the exact same story beats, the 2019 more or less being a shot-for-shot remake of the original. The 2019 version essentially remakes every single scene, just kind of stretching them out a little bit to kind of beef up the runtime a little bit. Of course, there are some scenes that are written just a little bit differently, like Simba meeting Rafiki for the first time. You know, they're written a little bit differently, but ultimately both versions of The Lion King hit the exact same story beats at roughly the exact same time. Not much changes in the way of characters either. Their personalities are basically the exact same between both versions. You know, the young Simba is still this young, eager cub who is in a rush to grow up and become the new king. Timon and Pumbaa are still sassy little animals with those amazing musical pipes. James Earl Jones does voice Mufasa in both versions of the film, and while he still has that amazing deep voice, it's pretty clear that in the 2019 version his voice has gotten a little bit more tired in his later years, you know, kind of similar to when he came back as Darth Vader in Rogue One, so obviously he does sound a bit better in the 1994 version. It makes the most sense for Donald Glover to take on the role of adult Simba from Matthew Broderick in the 1994 version, because not only is he a great musical talent, but he also can pull off a youthful character with a lot of potential in his adult years, basically kind of like his character Troy Barnes from Community. Beyonce as the voice of Nala was probably the second most perfect casting choice they made for this movie, right next to Seth Rogen as Pumbaa. But the big problem with these characters is that in the remake they are exactly what you would expect from these characters. Nothing really changes between the 1994 and the 2019 version aside from, you know, slightly different dialogue and a few new jokes from Timon and Pumbaa. They don't bring anything new to these characters, which is going to make some people honestly question the necessity of remaking this film in the first place. Probably the two characters that are more distinct from both versions are the hyenas. In the remake, they're voiced by Keegan-Michael Key and Eric Andre, so of course they bring their comedic style and abilities to these characters, so you get what you'd expect from these guys coming from talking hyenas. You know, especially if you saw Keegan-Michael Key as Ducky in Toy Story 4, you're in for that kind of stuff, which I think worked really well for these hyena characters. So in that regard, I kinda like the hyenas in the remake just a little bit more. Moving on to the visuals, this one's pretty obvious. Both movies are animated. The 1994 version is 2D animated with some 3D animation in there just to bring scenes to life even further, like the opening scene. And the remake is completely CG, but this time they go the realistic route to keep in line with Disney's recent slew of live-action remakes. And while the CGI is fantastic and it's damn near photorealistic, it's still not technically live-action, because I don't think they went out into the wilderness and filmed a bunch of animals fighting each other over an imaginary throne. And both films are visually beautiful in their own ways, both being prime examples of what you could do with animation in their separate eras. The 1994 Lion King obviously goes a more cartoonish route, making the animals move and react and express themselves in ways that these animals obviously wouldn't do in real life. The 2019 Lion King goes for the more realistic route and makes these animals feel more, well, animalistic. This time the characters move and react like you would expect from real-life lions and warthogs and hyenas and baboons. But the major downfall of the characters in the remake is that these photorealistic animals are just lacking in the emotion that you get from these 1994 2D animated versions. Simba's reaction to his father's death hits a lot harder in the 1994 version because the animators take more liberties to help further and properly express Simba's grieving in this scene, because we get to see him shed tears and act more like a human would in a situation like that, losing a loved one, so it's more relatable to the audience that way. 2019 version's characters are missing a lot of that emotion because they're restricted to what those animals could actually do in the real world. Their faces are a lot more blank, so it just loses a lot of emotion, not just the sad parts, but even the more lighthearted moments as well. Oh, Simba, that was a funny joke you told. Ah ha ha. I am so proud of you, son. Roar. So in that way, it's kind of ironic that the 2D, more cartoony version of these animals are a lot more humane and relatable than the live-action, photorealistic animals. So before we get to the final verdict, let's just go over a couple more last-minute comparisons between both versions. Every song from the 1994 version that you loved and grew up with is back here once again, the 2019 version. No new songs are present in the remake at all, and they really don't do anything new with the original songs either. The soundtrack is more or less a cover album of the original, and Hans Zimmer does come back to compose the score for this movie. He does take his original score and does update it to more of where he is now, so that much is really nice, but aside from that, nothing really changes as far as the music goes in the movie. And finally, while the cast of the 2019 version is full of quite a bit of musical talent, the only actor that kind of feels like he falls flat in his musical performance is Chitwell Ejiofor. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, but he plays Scar in this movie, and it just feels like in the one song that Scar has in this movie, he just kind of feels like he falls flat. He doesn't have the same musical ability as Jeremy Irons in the 1994, so it just doesn't have that finesse that Jeremy Irons brought to that song, so it kinda just sounds like, be prepared, be prepared, be prepared. Overall, Jon Favreau's Lion King remake does stick very close and very faithful to the original, but adding some beautiful CGI on top of that. But on the flip side, the 1994 Lion King is arguably one of the most beloved Disney films of all time, with so many lovable characters and memorable songs by Elton John, not to mention a buttload of direct-to-DVD sequels. When you compare it to Jon Favreau's Jungle Book remake, The Jungle Book, while of course being a Disney classic, I felt like it actually benefited from the live-action treatment, and it actually improved upon the original. I don't dislike the remake necessarily, but without the same emotions, and just feeling like the animators took the original movie and added a ray tracer element over the graphics, this remake just feels like it falls flat and just ultimately unnecessary. So, to probably nobody's surprise, the winner is of course the 1994 Lion King. I do understand that part of the reason Disney keeps remaking their animated movies, aside from a truckload of money, is so a new generation can fall in love with these stories all over again. But when you really don't add anything new to the mixture aside from some pretty graphics, this movie just feels like it was made because it's what's lucrative right now. So, but if you really want to see a live-action Lion King, then just go watch Black Panther. It's basically the same plot, but with vibranium. So that's my comparison between The Lion King and The Lion King. If you guys prefer one over the other, or if you just want to talk about these movies in general, or if you're wondering how many years it's going to take for Disney to catch up and start remaking the Pixar movies in live-action form, let me know down below, and we'll see you on the Brockopp side.